situated between the Song of Solomon and the book of Jeremiah in the first section of the Bible, commonly called the Old Testament. Isaiah was a prophet, a man who spoke God's action in the midst of the daily life of his time and place, not as predictions of later times or places. He's also considered to be one of the major prophets. A major prophet not meaning that his message is more important than minor prophets, but rather his book is long, many chapters, as is Jeremiah. And the minor prophets simply wrote less material. You'll find our reading on page 636 in the Pew Bible, and you can also access the reading via your tablet or smartphone on our guest internet access. From Isaiah chapter 7, verses 10 through 17. Again, the Lord spoke to Ahaz, saying, "Ask a sign of the Lord your God. Let it be deep as Sheol or high as heaven." But Ahaz said, "I will not ask, and I will not put the Lord to the test." Then Isaiah said, "Hear then, O house of David, is it too little for you, to weary mortals, that you weary my God also? Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Look, the young woman is with child and shall bear a son and shall name him Emmanuel. He shall eat curds and honey by the time he knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the child knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land before whose two kings you are in dread will be deserted. The Lord will bring on you and on your people and on your ancestral house such days as have not come since the day that Ephraim departed from Judah, the king of Assyria." Blessings on this reading of Holy Scripture this morning. Are you expecting? Now, mind you, I know when I'm asking this question, about half of the population thinks it means something it doesn't necessarily mean. And many of you are thanking God that you are not, nor ever will be, expecting in that way ever again. But as we know, there are all kinds of different expectations. And despite what our bulletin says, you still do have 2 more days. 2 more days before Christmas arrives. And it was very clear when I was shopping for just a few routine household items that anxiety and fear has filled the air. You see, there was all the determined cart pushing and the oblivious cutting in front of people, standing for a while, turning right into and nearly hitting you without noticing, mob that has besieged retail. All I needed was a new mop head, some batteries, and some light bulbs. You would think that the second coming of Christ was imminent and that there was a great sale on chocolate. Because clearly my feeble list was going to block the way of getting everything done and everything ready for this week. How dare I intrude on the cart merging? So when we find ourselves expecting in that sense, do we often find ourselves getting just as anxious and just as fearful. Anxious about the future, fearful perhaps about it too, anxious about whether things will be accepted once they're given and received, or fearful that they'll be rejected and the reaction will be, well, that's nice. Did we get the right size? Did we find the right model? Will this work with their existing equipment? Is this the perfect gift, or is it now the perfect return or refund? Can someone please just give me a sign that this is the right thing? Our scripture reading this morning, we are encountering actually a rather bumbling and rather fearful king of Judah by the name of Ahaz. Now I know it looks like Ahaz, but it's Ahaz in Hebrew. He's being pressured a bit to join an alliance with Israel and with Syria against the Assyrians in this passage. After some conversation with Isaiah, Ahaz doesn't give into the pressure from either Israel or Syria. Those are those two lands that Isaiah is talking about, but rather seeks an approving alliance or treaty with the Assyrians. That's what Ahaz has done. And now he's having buyer's remorse about it and wants a little assurance that this treaty's the right size and that the destruction of Israel and Syria, it was indeed part of God's plan in the first place. When have you wanted just a little more, just a bit more assurance that you have it right already? Maybe some kind of big, obvious sign of God's plan and a little check, yep, you are here in that whole faithfulness zone with God. But Ahaz doesn't want to do this directly, so he fakes it. He fakes a little modesty and piety by saying, oh, I don't want to give Lord the test. But he wants what God will give him in the first place. Assurance he's right. So if there are two empires that are seeking an alliance with your empire and you refused and they are now threatening, how strong really will your God be against their gods? That's the question Ahaz is asking. But God won't be fooled by Ahaz's earnest, I'm requesting without requesting request. God is giving a signal. God will provide the sign. But it's not like any sign that Ahaz was expecting. No, it will be simply that a child will be eating solid food. And Israel and Syria will no longer be your worry. That's it. Solid food. Stephanie, how did the solid food transition go? Pretty good. Yeah. By that time, how long does it take to go from bottle to solid food? Couple months? Several months? How many things are you frightened about right now, worried to death about right now, that by May you won't even remember? This is rather strange that God is saying, the babe will be born. The babe will be born, the babe will be weaned, and the war will collapse. This is not what Ahaz is probably seeking. He wants warrior God to appear, to protect Ahaz, and to protect, of course, his kingdom, Judah, and lead them to victory. He doesn't want children. He doesn't want a child, but look to that child as it progresses from newborn to toddler, and by that point, your anxiety and fears will be gone. the current can't sleep good at night crisis in your life will be gone in May. This God doesn't need a warrior class. This God will gain his victory within the milestones of simple childhood development, from that vulnerable infant to a walking, talking, crying, eating child. Let's face it, at times we would prefer that God sent us the big sign. The major disruption, the clear as day and the doubtless moment where we know beyond a doubt God's will and God's plan right here, right now. To settle our anxious, doubtful, and fearful spirits with that complete reversal of our situation, that complete vindication of our lives, that final and indisputable victory from our enemies and our adversaries. That's what we want. But we often fail to see God's will and plans in the ordinary experience of life and living. And there is always where God is going to appear, either his will or his plan. Not in great demonstrations of strength, but in the residing within our own vulnerabilities. That's what this God does. Our weaknesses make that good starting location for God to live with each of us. Because wouldn't we want a God that's there when we're vulnerable than a God who only shows up when we don't need him to be there? In our darkest of days, are we looking for the smallest of lights? Gail Moss, in her Advent devotional, All Creation Waits, the Advent Mysteries of New Beginnings, describes the life cycle of the common eastern firefly. Like many insects, the common eastern firefly dies off during the winter months. It can't be seen here at all. But firefly eggs glow. They actually glow just a little bit while being buried deep in the dark, wintry ground. And about 2 weeks after that egg is hatched, there's this red larvae that emerges and radiates yet a little more light, a little glow in that little mud cave as that body melts again and remakes over and over again, each time growing a little bigger, the light glowing a little brighter. It will become a crawling light bulb underneath the dark earth for 300 days, until in just the span of 10 to 12 days, it goes from larvae worm to new firefly. That smallest of lights now delights and dances to us throughout the summertime night sky. Are we looking? Are we truly looking for that smallest of lights on the darkest of days? To those who have had the joy of welcoming children into your lives, there is probably no higher expression of love shared between two people than loving parents and their offspring. Our glimmer, our dance of creation, that remarkable mystery of pregnancy and childbirth, life bursting forth and comforting our anxieties and resolving all of our fears, that dwelled during the entire process. God is love. And expressed love is always going to be vulnerable. God rarely comes into this world with declarations and big Hollywood productions. This God, the one that we can still receive comes to us with little fingers and tiny toes of an infant, helpless child. In the midst of all of our anxieties, in the midst of all of our fears, in the midst of our searching for truth, searching for purpose, searching for a plan. And our present day anxieties and fears will be forgotten as we watch the infant child grow. So this week, with all of its anxious and fearful expectations, I challenge you to find the light of loving joy. And perhaps the difficulties of negotiating treaties that are greater than the Treaty of Versailles between Uncle Ted and Aunt Martha at the Christmas banquet. Details that are more difficult than Syria or Israel affairs. I ask you to look for the signs showing the very presence of God. Seek not one who has depth or breadth or height. Seek one who loves you even when your faith has its own depths. Seek that smallest sign that life is returning, life is renewing, life is restoring. For that is where God will always be found. So what sign are you looking for? Are you still looking for the mighty warrior or the vulnerable child? Let every heart prepare him room this day and always. Amen.